Hello, everyone. Hi. So, Kai-Fu, I'm so glad that I'm here with Kai-Fu today. We are old friends, and this
Yes,
is probably our third or fourth fireside chat.
something like that. Next
Yeah.
time I'll interview you.
Sure. And we never had a fire, but okay. So I think one of the first questions I saw, I thought was, it gave me a little chuckle, which is that when you started out in AI, I actually remember your thesis in speech recognition, continuous speech recognition, and I was in the same area. And I remember the first time I saw you on Good Morning America, demoing the very first speech recognition system, right? And I was a student in Columbia then, and I heard you were the TA of my professor. So since then, that was way back in, you finished your PhD in 1988, and so late 80s, early 90s. What has changed? Did you anticipate any of this?
I got into artificial intelligence because I thought it was an exploration in how our mind works. I think many of us did. You too? Yeah. But I think as it turns out, an engineering approach that really created a different brain than ours, completely different. We learn abstraction and causality and reasoning and creativity, and we have emotions. And AI has none. Today's AI has none of that. It's based on learning from a large amount of data and being able to. And I think the first generation of AI systems able to do very smart tasks that can be connected from content and software and hardware and really become an omni-use technology used everywhere. And we're now seeing kind of the next generation of AI systems that's not just a goal-oriented AI, which is already very powerful and not yet fully penetrated. I think we're now seeing AI really having at least an appearance of cognition and intelligence, that it can, through a very set of smart algorithms, it can create what's an artificial memory and able to synthesize content that is, in many cases, indistinguishable and better than human in terms of content creation. So I think after 40 years of working in this area, we're finally seeing AI really approaching maybe helping us understand how the human brain works, maybe how the human brain works can inspire the third generation of AI. So it's a very exciting time to be involved today. But I wouldn't have, I think I was too naive to predict how and when this would happen. I think I might have predicted it to happen sooner. But after my thesis in '88, we started to enter what's called an AI winter. So I stuck with it for a few more years, but ultimately moved away and worked on I was at Apple, worked on QuickTime, multimedia, SGI, 3D, but now with the resurgence of AI, of course, all of us are doing more than ever because of the excitement that exists today.
I can't believe it's been 40 years.
I'm afraid so. Yeah.
So I think.
I started when I was 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I was in kindergarten.
No, I was 2. You couldn't be in kindergarten.
So actually, I want to highlight something here because most people probably don't know. The area that's called AI used to be different from what we were doing. Your thesis was using data to train a system to recognize human speech. That was actually the beginning of what we call statistical approach, statistical modeling of speech and natural language, and then machine translation follows suit. That was actually the beginning of data-driven methods in AI, right? And people didn't call it AI. And then there was the other school of AI people who were working on planning, like more, what do you call, rule-based approach?
Yeah, expert system, rule-based.
So today's AI system is more of a descendant of statistical data-driven AI, isn't it? And can you tell us like the evolution, perhaps?
Yeah, I think intuitively, most of us think about programming as a recipe, right? So a program works like you take this, you could take some eggs, take some flour, mix it together. When it appears thick enough, then add salt and turn on the oven. So basically, programming is like a recipe for those of you not in the engineering domain. What AI did, even the first generation, I talked about the deep learning type of AI, is instead of creating a recipe, which is the human tells a computer step by step what to do, that approach has a lot of fragility because the human thinking is not as simple as we think. Our brains, we think of our brains operating as a recipe, right? If then else. I'm coming to the Kaifu fireside chat. I will drive to this place. I will come out. If there's a red light, I stop. It doesn't really work that way because we're able to react to a lot of things, and that's how our human brains work. So if you try to program how the human thinking works into a computer, then a few problems will happen. One is that what we think how our brains work really is hardly complete. Secondly, it sets an upper bound on how good the computer can be because it's merely copying us. Then it will never be as smart and good as us. So the alternate approach, as Pascal mentioned, is how when you take a large amount of data and you tell a smart, self-organizing, self-learning black box, currently black box algorithm that says, hey, look, when you see this type of data, it's John. When you see this type of a face, that's Mary. When you hear a sound like this, it's cake, and so on. And then by supervising and teaching it one step at a time, it learns to separate John from Mary and cake from bread, and so on and so forth. So to a business owner, what this means is you no longer have to hire programmers to write the recipe-like expert system. You just collect enough data and show it all the different things and teach it what it is that you want to optimize. So if you were a bank doing loans, you want to minimize the number of potential defaults on the loan. If you're a TikTok or Facebook, you want to maximize the number of minutes that people click and watch your content. So you can now see how this can be applied in software domain, in internet software, wherever there's a lot of data. And if you have a traditional business, whether it's manufacturing, energy, or even education, and any app that you can capture data, you can use that data to teach AI to achieve an optimization or a maximization or minimization of some objective function that can deliver business results. So imagine how powerful this is. Jeff Bezos can, without leaving his office, tell his people, I want to maximize user clicks and user minutes, or I want to maximize revenue, or I want to maximize profits. Based on each of Amazon's business objectives, each user would be shown content that would achieve that very purpose, thereby maximizing business results. And that's why AI, even the first generation, has been so powerful and useful. And that's also why internet companies who have the most data have been able to develop the strongest AI programs and the supercomputers and the data sets. And that's why countries like China, which is not as technologically advanced as the US, has been able to use the massive data based on the massive population and the power of super apps like WeChat to collect data and letting Tencent, ByteDance, Alibaba become world leaders in AI. So that's kind of the first generation, and we're still living the first generation. I would guess most of you, your companies are probably not really using AI in any main way, so we're probably less than 10% penetrated in the entire market. So here we have a first generation that's still 90+% unpenetrated, so huge business opportunity. And we've already kind of seen people who've invented the second generation, and those changes are even bigger.
Yes, so you mentioned the second generation. I assume you're talking about the current quantum jump in. So you talked about purpose-built, so task-oriented AI systems before, and also how we teach the system to learn with supervision, so supervised learning. So the most recent events that has come into light to the public is systems like ChatGPT, and they are actually not built for one purpose only. They are also not built with supervision. They are kind of they learn from the internet, but in supervised manner. So a lot of people feel kind of kind of shocked that AI can be such general purpose and that it can learn on its own from the internet. So should people be afraid? Or do you see any potential of this kind of, it's not really general AGI yet, but it is way more general purpose. So can you tell us what is the potential of such systems, or where you see the applications can come from, and where there's any risk?
Sure. So first, just to for those of you who have not tried it, you can go home and Google ChatGPT or DALL-E or one of these systems. These are from OpenAI, a fantastic AI company in the U.S. But there are also a number of other companies that have developed similar technologies, and you can try these at home. So basically, to describe it in two examples, the first example is you can basically chat with this ChatGPT anything you want, and it has an encyclopedic knowledge that it has grabbed from the internet and cleansed and summarized and abstracted the essence so that it can answer anything. Okay, it will make some mistakes just like humans do, but its answers are sometimes amazingly brilliant and insightful. For example, you could say, who are the best 5 candidates for the next president of Asia Society, replacing Kevin Rudd? And you could also say, we'd also like someone who knows a lot about, whatever, U.S.-China relations or heritage of Asian culture, or, the equal importance of China, Japan, and India. Whatever it is you want, it will give you answers. And it obviously will not always be correct, but it can be amazingly insightful. So much so that you can ask, who's the best candidate for the job, and tell me why. And it will do so. So if it can answer that question, it can pretty much answer any question you have in mind. It's not perfect. I would say it's maybe 20% brilliant, 50% very good, 20% wrong, and 10% ridiculous. But that's what humans are for, right? If you're just looking for ideas, if you're writing an essay, one of my friends says, I would challenge my kids by saying, if you can't in some field do better than ChatGPT, then you're not going to have a job. And I think that is correct. So please try it when you go home. The other thing you can try is an image generation called DALL-E, DALL-E. And again, there are other examples, such as Stable Diffusion, a number of other companies. But what you can do there is you can a new trend is you're programming by language. So before, those of you who don't program, you felt, maybe unskilled or inadequate. But now all of you can program, because now we program by language. Just like in ChatGPT, I gave the example of asking a question in English language. So you can now ask it to draw a picture. You can say, make me a picture with Ronnie Chan as the Superman flying over Hong Kong, creating an amazing city with golden glow from the sunset. And
we
it
should
will
have set up the demo here, shouldn't we?
We could.
could have.
It really does
Yeah.
work. You might think it's
Yeah.
incredible.
So in real life.
It can be photorealistic. You can make it in Pixar characters. You can make a cartoon. You can do a Monet painting with Ronnie and everything. And it will look amazing. So now think about the future, right? If your children were going into graphic design, well, that's going to be really bad, because graphic designers are the bridge between ideas in words, right? If you're the marketing director, you would tell a graphic designer that's what you want, what I talked about Ronnie in Hong Kong, right? And then the graphic designer would draw things, just saying, that's no good, that one's good. I want this to be changed. I want Ronnie to fly higher, and I want him to have a cape. And it will do that. And now DALL-E will do that for you. So sorry for the long description. So that's how exciting this new technology is. And to answer Pascal's question, it's amazing in content creation. What's even more amazing is it doesn't lose the capability of optimizing and targeting individuals. So what that means is, if you want to make something very targeted for individuals. For example, if I want to sell Tesla to, let's say, 4 random people in the audience, if I know who you are, I can really sell something much better than before. So if you love Elon Musk, I would have to weave that into the advertising message along with the picture of Elon and all that. If you love fast cars, I would tell you about 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds. If you want safe cars, I would quote the Consumer Report. If you want fancy gadgets, I will show you the pad and the doors that flip open like McLaren. And if you love the environment, I tell you about how much carbon emissions you would save by using a Tesla. So it can target each individual so as to maximize the probability that you will buy a Tesla based on its intimate knowledge of you. You could say, oh, who has that knowledge of me? Well, lots of companies. Facebook has it, Google has it, and and a lot of organizations have it. So this ability to target people using advertising, and think about the future. When you go to Amazon, right? Today we see different recommendations because we're different. But at least when we see the same product, we see the same description. But in the future, Amazon descriptions will be auto-generated to match and entice and potentially trick consumers from buying that thing by not necessarily describing just what the product is, but what it takes to get you to buy it. So think about that disruption to the advertising industry. So finally to answer Pascal's question, of course that's fraught with danger. This is the most dangerous AI technology that I have seen, because how do you guarantee truth in advertising? How do you prevent misleading people? And what's the consequences? And how do you measure that? That's all unknown. And if that's still not convincing, you guys remember Cambridge Analytica, right? That was really nothing. The new technologies we call AIGC, AI-generated content, is infinitely more powerful. It's like Cambridge Analytica on steroids, because Cambridge Analytica only targeted 5 psychometric groups. And this AIGC can target each person precisely. So that, I think, is incredibly challenging, dangerous, and hard to provide good governance.
Yeah, and at the same time, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. And there are a lot of regulations coming out and guidelines from the EU, from the Chinese government, from various governments, and you've been involved, and we've both been involved in a lot of the advisory groups. How should we govern? Like, should we govern AI research, telling the researchers you can't do this, you can't do that? For one, I would say no to that, but there are people who think that we shouldn't be allowed to do all kinds of AI research. And then there are people who think that we need to govern like how the products are released. Others think we need to regulate people, the users. You are not allowed to use something to kill somebody or do harm. So all these dynamics are being played out, and nothing is clear. It's kind of muddled. So what is your view on all this?
Well, I'll share my view, but when I'm done, I'd love to hear your view, because you're the expert in responsible AI. This general area is incredibly important. And I think historically, it's never been fruitful or successful to limit people from using their imagination. So that can't be the right answer. I think all the other options are open. I would say regulation should be the last resort, but obviously is needed. I think the number of solutions can be multifaceted. For example, if AI is being biased, being unfair to women or a certain race or older people, et cetera, what could be done is a better set of tools that will help the AI engineers to ensure there is a reasonable data balance and that results are less likely to be biased. So those tools, and also educating the engineers that they bear important responsibility, those things could be helpful. In some cases, maybe a technology can be useful. For example, we worry about the privacy of our data, but there are new technologies in the area of privacy computing, such as federated learning, that potentially could allow for data to contribute, gathered and contribute to the overall AI system, but your data would never be shared beyond a certain set of people that you designate as trustworthy. So those algorithms using technology are being pursued. There are also examples of business model. I think one of the big challenges that we see is that the pure advertising business model is potentially more vulnerable to problems because the interest for the user may diverge from the interest of the company. So a Facebook or a Twitter, they just want us to see more content. And naturally, they'll program their AI that way. And the more content we see, there are good things about it, but also some content is provocative, but not truthful or not helpful or too extreme. So somehow that needs to be balanced. But it's really hard task to ask social media companies to reduce their traffic because that reduces the advertising, reduces their revenue, reduces their profit, reduces their stock price. Many of you are business owners, understand that challenge. But if we migrate more and more towards, let's say, a subscription business model, right? Very few of us complain that Netflix has a lot of fake news or bad content because we have the final control. If Netflix shows a bunch of bad things, we stop subscribing. So those of us in the investment business should think more about subscription types of models. So these are some examples. And ultimately, if these things don't solve the problem, you can go back and look at regulations. So that's my general thought. But please, the experts should say something about this.
So I'm actually very curious when you mention subscription-based model, because the early promise of the internet and all this usage, they became advertisement-based because they promised a free usage, right? It's supposed to democratize technology and access so that people in rural parts of India can have a smartphone, they can access all the information without paying anything. So are you suggesting everybody pay subscription, or it's like a freemium model? Like some people pay subscription, but then the rest still have to. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that remains to be seen. Obviously, Elon Musk is doing an experiment to require some Twitter users with a blue check to pay for it. We'll see if that works out. We don't know the answers, but what we do know is that a subscription business model potentially aligns the interests better between the user and the provider. But there are people who believe this is inadequate, like Tristan Harris believes this is completely inadequate. Then he's pursuing certain things like having Apple notify us how much time we spend in each app so the users become aware. But I think that's a tiny step also. Of course, there are people looking, the Web3 fanatics, I'm sure you've all met a few of them, and their vision is correct, right? Let us own the data and build apps with that as the premise. That might be a long-term solution, but of course, Web3 has currently no killer app. So I think we should try all of these and see what sticks. I'm not suggesting subscription is a panacea, but they're all worth trying.
So, and then talking about regulation or responsible AI, so far we've been discussing B2C applications, right? And for a lot of the business owners here, and for a large part of the world we live in, there are a lot of B2B applications. And so you asked for my view. One of my views is that for each of this industry, be it finance industry or health, medical industry, they already have their own regulations. They have very, very healthy and well thought out regulations already. So my view would be in those applications, we should make sure the AI technology comply with the existing regulations instead of having new regulations that can be just kind of overfitting to the current AI technology, will be obsolete tomorrow and so on. So, but can you talk a bit more about like a future application? You in your book you talk about the future, right? So in the future, where do you see AI application? Where do you see its potential in terms of B2B applications? How might it change our world today, be it in health, be it in finance, be it in other areas?
Yeah, so going back to the first generation AI, because as I said, over 90% of the businesses are not using AI. So getting them to embrace the first gen AI, it seems like from us as a VC, that's my day job, by the way, investing in companies, it's a great thing to do, right? Selling AI to business companies that can adopt them in their use. So we are now seeing a true proliferation of AI in areas like drug discovery, using it for visual examination and also autonomous forklifts, and also autonomous vehicles are coming, AI-based fintech. AI is great to use in financial institutions because they have so much data, just like internet companies. So the list goes on. So I do think from an investment standpoint, we're nowhere near saturation of the use of AI and the power of using AI to deliver business results. So for those of you not thinking about it, this is I think something you really need to do, just like embracing the internet was something if you didn't do, you would fall behind. So in terms of regulation for these, I think Pascal's point is a really good one. It took decades, if not centuries, to develop these rules for financial, manufacturing, and other industries. So we should use them as the first principles in guiding and putting guardrails against things going wrong. I do think in the future we'll need to have new rules, because when the rules of the game change too much, old rules won't apply anymore. I think for the first gen AI, I think your advice is great. The second gen AI, I would question if we might not need something bigger. To give you an example, when automobiles were first introduced in UK and US, there was something called the red flag law, which says because there's so many horses, and you have to go back in time, think about this. There are so many horses and carriages. They dominate the traffic, the streets. And the appearance of this giant, monstrous automobile is really scary to the horses. So they said, well, to protect the horses from getting scared, here's the new law. You need to have someone walking in front of your automobile, waving a red flag as a signal so that the horses and the drivers are not frightened. And if it's at night, you need a lantern in addition to the red flag. Obviously, overfitting and over-catering to the traditional approach. So at some point, AI technologies may be too large and advanced that new laws will be needed. But I think the first gen, I think we're good with using existing laws. Second gen, I wonder if new laws are needed. But even then, I think we need to be very cautious to make sure they're not, too much suffocating the development of technology, but also protecting the fundamental rights and responsibilities of users.
Yeah, well, I for one, I would love to have self-driving car because I'm such a terrible driver. But the roads in Hong Kong and the regulations makes it seem impossible to have self-driving car here for a long time. So I wonder, what do you think of, us being in Hong Kong? Hong Kong's our home, wonderful place. I've been at UST since '97. We do world-class research. But what do you see the opportunities? Like, what should Hong Kong become? With between the two superpowers of AI, right? In your book, China and the U.S. What's Hong Kong's role? What are the opportunities for people who are based in Hong Kong, not necessarily just in Hong Kong? What do you see?
Well, I think there are a couple of big areas that Hong Kong can really work on and develop. One is that I think Hong Kong has a lot of great researchers, Pascal being one example, and I've met others. And this source of research can really fuel the next-gen companies, just as research in Stanford and Berkeley have become amplified with Silicon Valley. But what's missing for that to happen is investment and entrepreneurial and VC ecosystem, which I'm more than happy to contribute a small part with me spending more time and building a humble and small group here in Hong Kong. I think we want to leverage that research. It's a clear recognition that this research excellence exists. It's arguably as good, if not better, than top schools in the mainland. So I think that's a great thing. And Hong Kong can also attract great researchers and students from worldwide. I would say more so than mainland. So I think that's double opportunity for Hong Kong. The second thing I think is the financial institutions that are very strong here. whether it's investment bank, private banking, et cetera, you have so much data, right? And in AI, you want, first and foremost, a lot of data. Secondly, accurate and good data. And in finance, you always have both because banks aren't going to store incorrect statements, right? And investment banks aren't going to have some huge error in their transactions. So you automatically have validated large amount of data that can be applied to the banking, investment, insurance, and fintech industries. I think that's the second big advantage. I would say there are also some things missing. I think the VC space can be improved. There's obviously, because Hong Kong's small, so very few small cities or countries would have a large VC ecosystem, but Hong Kong can improve on that. And another aspect is entrepreneurs. I've become a big admirer of the Chinese entrepreneurs because of their hunger, energy, drive, and desire for success and incredible work ethic. I think over time, Hong Kong will have a good number of domestic or Hong Kong specific entrepreneurs. But in the meantime, mainland has a lot of people to offer. And the same is true with engineers. I think Hong Kong currently doesn't have enough great engineers. And I think working with mainland can help that. And of course, all of that can be applied internationally to the extent that geopolitics don't get in the way. But so far, I think Hong Kong is good for attracting people from mainland as well as from other places in the world.
Yeah, when you mention entrepreneurship, I always remember the story of Frank Wang and Li Zexiang, my student and colleague in my department. When they started DJI, they actually started from, Frank Wang was one of our students, and he started from the dorm room at UST. And they had, for years, a hard time getting funded in Hong Kong. I remember helping them to, look for investors, local investors. They just had a hard time. So they moved to Shenzhen. And the rest is history. So very few people in the world know DJI is a Hong Kong company. The drone industry, consumer drone industry, was invented by them. And they had to move to China because they couldn't find local investment. So Kai-Fu's point is really, really important. There is a lot of money here, you guys, but support our talents, support the local talents. Frank came from China, but he went to undergraduate at UST. We have lots of those students from all around the world, and they deserve a chance. And in return, imagine the return you would have gotten from DJI. So yes, thank you for making that appeal. Another thing, though, I feel like in China and US, I work with groups in both regions that they have a lot of this. In China, the government is very supportive, and in the US, obviously, these big companies have a lot of resources. In today's AI research, we really need lots of computing power. And that's almost the bottleneck, to my group's research, for example. We cannot do research on our own without going, work with these big companies. And that's because of the lack of computer sources. You've had the chance to talk to different stakeholders in Hong Kong, right? What is your suggestion? Do you think our government should give us funding and build a huge server farm, GPU farm, or should our investors support? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I think the big issue now is the second generation ChatGPT-like systems are actually fueled by supercomputers. What I didn't tell you earlier is that when you go home and try the ChatGPT, every question you ask will cost about 5 cents to OpenAI for paying for the servers to answer that one question. You multiply that by the millions of customers they have who use it 10, 20 times a day, it's a big expense. And actually, that's just for the inference, the actual usage of the system. To build these models, they actually have to go through a much longer phase called training, which can require $50 to $100 million of compute power in order to do. So that creates a huge issue worldwide for researchers and entrepreneurs alike, right? Researchers don't have that kind of funding. Entrepreneurs don't have that kind of funding. And if something is not done, we run the risk of AI becoming dominated by the few powerful, visionary but powerful. And as powerful companies generally are, selfishly powerful, aimed at their own business benefits. So that, I think, is an issue facing countries and governments globally. I've talked to various people. I just visited probably one of the richest schools in the world. And I asked them, you have all this compute power. What do you plan to do to make your AI research the best in the world? And they said, well, we do have this, 3,000 GPU. This school just bought 3,000 H100 or A100s. Phenomenal amount of resource, costing tens of millions, maybe if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And they said, well, we still don't have enough to give around because we have an egalitarian policy to let any professor and student use it. So I think on the one hand, I do think we need more compute resources, but I think it probably needs some kind of non-egalitarian policy to let the so-called best researchers with the most likely breakthrough to get sufficient time to build a competitive product. But then how do you promote something that's not egalitarian in university environment? So that's something I haven't been able to figure out. I do think it's needed, but once you have it, so let's say UST got a $300 million computer, now everybody's on it wanting to build the world's largest model. Well, how do you deal with that? But I guess let's first get the $300 million first.
I would say collaboration. So it's hard to do research as one single professor. Even Meta and all these places, people collaborate. So I promote like cross-disciplinary and multi-stakeholder kind of collaboration. Also collaborating with companies who want to see certain applications that you might not know where they will pan out. And the Hong Kong government actually matches funding from companies. Sometimes 90% from the government, sometimes 50%. And we have been working with mostly mainland companies because they are the ones who are eager to support us to do things they want to do. And then some American companies. So we would like to see more Hong Kong companies working with us to build future generations of AI applications. There's one question I thought was interesting, which is that in your book, 2041, why did you think it was important to include fictional stories from Chen Qiufan in your book? Yeah. How does fiction convey the idea in a non-fiction writing cannot?
Okay, this is the obligatory embedded advertising for my book. Yeah, I have just published a book called AI 2041. And for this book, I chose to work with a science fiction writer, one of the best in China, probably one of the top 3 or 4. And the way we worked together was I outlined the technological roadmap, and using those roadmaps, he mapped them into 10 short stories. And the 10 short stories we agreed that the 10 short stories would take place in 10 different cities in the world, and also that each story would embed 2 to 4 new technologies. And it's beyond AI, includes quantum, blockchain, and a lot of things, synthetic biology, and so on. So I had to do a lot of work myself to study up to these technologies. And then each story, the stories will go from relatively simple AI to more and more complex AI. So the reason we chose this approach was because I felt AI is so important for people to understand. Yet many people regard it as rocket science, impossible to understand. I write something technical, people's eyes glaze over. So, and I just thought that one TV series that was very effective in understanding technologies and seeing them in action, although maybe a bit pessimistic and negative, is the series Black Mirror. So that was the trigger that said, okay, can we make a more positive Black Mirror, maybe like a white mirror, so that it shows technology, and maybe 8 times out of 10, it ends well rather than negatively. I think that optimism is somewhat backed up by history, as we've had many difficult technologies that eventually matured. And in most of the cases, the great majority of the applications are positive, with some negative ones. But cautionary measures are needed and guardrails are needed. So those are the things we try to convey. And hopefully the book was easy to read. After each one of his short stories, which I validated as technologically possible, likely in the next 10 to 20 years, I would write a section describing the technology, referencing the story so it's more interesting and relatable, and explaining the benefit and downside of each technology, and also for the downside, what can be done about it.
So would you consider using ChatGPT or another AI to write your next book?
Yeah, I would, but not with him as not with Stanley as my co-author, because writers are very proud of their unique skill set, and I think they're right that I don't see ChatGPT replacing Stanley Chen Jiufan, that not anytime soon, but they are getting better and better. So at my constant nudging for this AI 2041, we actually made him a mini ChatGPT using my company's technologies, which is not as good. And we just said, please, well, let's try it. And we actually created an interface that he could type a story up to a certain point and have AI propose 3 different branches on how the story develops with the first few sentences written for him. And he used it for a day or 2. He came back and says, Kai-Fu, just can't do it. I don't know if the AI was really that bad, or did he feel uncomfortable showing an example and opening himself to questions from journalists of when will your job be replaced?
Yeah. I actually worry more about ChatGPT and the like, not replacing creative writers, but technical writers. Me and my students, we have to write papers. And one point of writing these papers is learn to communicate your idea. It's not just about explaining what we do, but while you write, you structure your ideas better, right? But today, I think it's already possible to use AI to write technical papers. You give it like the tables, the results, experiment results. It can write technical papers. And to me, that is like, that's threatening, because the main thing we teach PhD students, the main part of PhD training is not like taking exams, but really about, it's a way of thinking, a way of approaching problems and solving problems. And that you learn a lot of that through writing. So I'm gonna ban AI writing in my group for sure. And our area already said you cannot use that. But how do we know? Like how that's definitely gonna impact education, right? Not just PhD students, the younger students. What are your thoughts on this?
I think kids need to be taught a sense of ownership and pride in the work that they create. And they need to be pushed to the limit when they're willing anyway, on excelling beyond what AI can do. As mentioned earlier, for young people, if they can't do better than ChatGPT, then they won't have a job. So I think that needs to be embedded into the education process. At the same time, I think ChatGPT and similar technologies can provide useful references. So if somehow the education can be such that they look at examples of academic papers written by ChatGPT and learn what's good and bad, and then use it to write better papers. I think that's the ultimate goal. I'm hopeful because, kids today don't really handwrite, but they haven't forgotten the letters of the alphabet or the Chinese characters. So I'm hopeful that we can get through this one too.
Well, thank you. So before we go to the audience questions, perhaps do you have a last statement or message for our audience today?
Yeah, I think just that hopefully today, if there's one message that you could take away with, it really is that AI is here and now and still making breakthroughs, both at the same time. So it does matter, it will matter for your business, for your future, and for your children and grandchildren's future.
Well, thank you, Kai-Fu. Should we now take questions from the audience? Over there.
Hi, Dr. Lee. It's great to see you again. I'm Brian Wong. I've just got a question concerning the rates of change, because you mentioned at the start of the conversation that you're quite alarmed by the pace at which ChatGPT 3 has emerged from this all. And I was just wondering, are we seeing an increase in the rates of change in AI in such a manner that the inevitability of acceleration would mean that the pace of growth and development would outstrip that of regulators and governmental authorities and also experts trying to play catch up? And throw into the mix then inertia, ossification, and also just absolute ignorance on the part of some policymakers amidst the fractious global political environments we see today. Are you optimistic about the prospects of regulation of AI in a year's time, in 5 years' time, or a decade down the road? Because it strikes me as, the prospects are pretty gloomy as I see it. Thank you very much.
I see. I thought you were going to ask me whether the acceleration of the growth would deliver AGI, making humans useless. But that answer, I would say, still no. There are many things that we can do that we have no idea how to do, even with advanced second-gen AI. But on the regulations issue, using US as an example, the regulators are easily 10 years behind and 10 times slower than the development of any technology. I was at Microsoft when the Department of Justice investigated Microsoft for antitrust. And when they eventually doled out the punishment, so to speak, Microsoft no longer mattered. Google was the talk of town. Then, of course, they switched looking at Google, and of course, they're still lagging. They couldn't catch operating system for Microsoft, search engine for Google. This is 10 times faster than either. So if they were 10 times slower before, now they're 100 times slower, at least American regulators. I don't think other governments are dramatically better either. So I'm not optimistic that the regulators will easily get it right the first time. Where I do have some hope, and Pascal can chime in again, this is her area. I think one is maybe multiple countries can try different things and learn from each other. Maybe smaller countries like Singapore, the UAE, maybe Hong Kong, as a city, not country, can also develop something that can be more easily implemented than a large country like US or China, and that could be useful. And I'm also hopeful that the industry can come up with some self-discipline, self-regulation, or ideas so that it becomes responsible without waiting for the regulations to come down. That's my hope. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree definitely that regulations take a long time. I'm on one of the IEEE standards group. We've been working over 2 years to try to come up with the standards for operational guidelines in AI companies. It's much slower than I would have liked. And every time we need to decide something, there needs to be quorum. And there are a lot of people who are not experts in AI and others who are not experts in companies. So it takes forever. And by the time, 2 years later now, AI technology has changed. And my advocacy in that group has always been, don't overfit. Don't try to regulate what we're doing now. Think of the bigger picture, and think about the future. And that is very, very hard. It's a challenge. But then, for example, like different countries, they have different perspectives. In China, the Chinese government actually consult all the AI companies and the AI experts. And then the Chinese leadership is mostly STEM trained, right? They are themselves engineering trained. So they will ask experts and they want to learn about AI technologies very quickly. And they're more like practical. So one of the most recent guidelines from China is that all recommendation engines must allow user to turn off the recommendation engine, right? Turn off the recommendation. So TikTok users can turn it off. And this is the first time like any country has got to that level of regulation. US, EU doesn't have that level. And that's actually informed by the Chinese, Kai-Fu knows people there. So they are more, they're closer to the applications and to the, so the, Hong Kong, I would say we are in this very good position, curious position of East meets West, right? That's a cliche, but it is really true in the sense that our culture is really based on both the Confucian Chinese culture and also the Enlightenment-based Western culture. So we can be a center of, comparative AI governance and ethics. We can be a center of AI testing and validation in the future, perhaps. And so that's why I'm still here. That's why Kai-Fu's here. So, yeah.
How can you? Sorry, Michael Jepson, Hong Kong. Just a quick question: how can you build in moral judgment into AI? You were alluding to the, political correctness and so on forth, but isn't it the moral orientation, the moral compass, by the end of the day, that keeps us from veering into the dangerous grounds of, the system taking over?
Yeah, I think in the first generation AI, I think we can teach it based on the outcome that we want. So if that outcome includes, fatality, cost of fatality in in an autonomous vehicle or a robotic surgeon, I think one could imagine that being built into the training of the very objective function that the AI operates. We do the best we can, and we have a mechanism to update and improve if there are issues, just like most software. And I think we need to make sure it's as good as human moral judgment on those issues. And I think we can, because many of us think of us as the, having the perfect moral compass. But in reality, when you check with some driver who's hit some child, I think they're not necessarily aware why they did what they did, nor will they necessarily tell the truth. AI can always tell the truth. We do need to work on explainability and taking away the black box issues, but I'm optimistic if the benchmark is substantially better than average human, that can be accomplished. But if you measure that as some grand truth, that there is either you're at a perfect moral judgment or you're not, then both humans and AI will fail. That's my thought on the first gen AI. The second gen is so new that I think it presents a much larger challenge. I probably need to think about it, and it's really, I would say the second gen AI is even more black box and harder to explain. So I think that will be a very big challenge, but I think we clearly have to face it and overcome it, because the example I gave about Cambridge Analytica, right? Where do you put the line of you've gone too far in truth in advertising, or misleading the user, or taking advantage of the user's vulnerabilities? These are not very objective things, yet I can see the tremendous danger they could add. And that's why I view the second gen AI having incredible challenges and vulnerabilities, as well as massive economic upside for the investors. So we do have to absolutely work on it, because the problem gets much, much more intense and challenging.
So maybe the lady next to Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. Dr. Lee, I was at your book tour when you were in New York a few years ago, talking about the AI superpowers. I remember you said the Chinese AI companies and the US AI companies, you predicted correctly, actually, at that time, you would see them competing in two different worlds. The Chinese companies competing in non-English speaking markets, whereas the US companies would be addressing markets for English speaking users. Now, fast forward, to now, with all the changes in geopolitical development, and also the development in technology decoupling, what do you see as the trend for big Chinese companies that are already global? What are the challenges you would see going forward for both them and also the Western AI superpowers?
Sure. Yeah, I think if we look at the recent development in AI, this is all first gen AI because second gen is too new. In the US, I think it's led by where US has natural strengths, and same with China. So the American natural strength is enterprise software, is using very lightweight software and built in a very methodical, architecturally elegant way that facilitates easy reuse, and it applies to many domains, not all domains, but where it applies, the business model, the growth, the impact is significant, and the data gathered is huge. And from that data comes smart AI. So we're sort of seeing a lot of very interesting companies like Snowflake, Databricks, Data Robot, building pieces that on top of which data science and AI can really take shape and grow. If you go to Silicon Valley, I was just talking to one of the top Silicon Valley VCs, and they basically said, yeah, we just do enterprise software. There's so much opportunity here, and AI built on top of that is a natural. And then the data belongs to the company, so there's no data usage issue. So that's where the US is going and clearly leading China in this domain. Where China is interestingly leading is in the area of automation and robotics. This is much uglier, much more solution-oriented, much hardware plus software, and much more industry-specific. So to a typical Silicon Valley VC, this looks ugly, lower margin, special work, system integration, solutions, not platform, not build it with 9 engineers and have 10 million users. So Silicon Valley doesn't like it, but China likes it because the hard work, the solution, the clear value, and also the importance of manufacturing to China. It's the main cornerstone of the economy. So the government encourages and subsidizes. So as a result, I think China robotics, including autonomous vehicles within factories, ports, many sectors, manufacturing, industrial, oil and gas, and steel and iron, all kinds of industries is really taking off. I think that's interesting. It's led to this bifurcation, which I think I correctly predicted, but didn't see it happening in such extreme ways, with each country leading by far in that particular area. And it's all a virtuous or it's all cyclical, right? It's when the VC I spoke to this morning in Silicon Valley says, what do you guys invest in? I talk about robotics, manufacturing. He says, oh, that's ugly. We don't do that. So, each country is investing in its own thing. So that's interesting. And then finally, the point you made about Chinese companies going global, I think we'll see more of that. TikTok is the first one you're all familiar with. Another company called Shein, if you haven't seen, that's a phenomenal company, 100 billion plus also. Both companies are phenomenal in taking innovative Chinese business model with interesting AI integration. And I would expect Chinese software, more Chinese software, B2C software, not enterprise, B2C software like that to grow. I mean, arguably, these are probably the $200 billion latest fastest growth B2C software companies that have come from China and applied to the rest of the world. I would expect that to continue. I do think that geopolitics will probably reduce the potential usage and impact than what it would have been previously, but still I think that's yet another opportunity from China.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. My name is Timis Low. I just returned from Shanghai. Of course, I have learned a lot being based in Shanghai for the past 10 years, and also learning from your books on AI, IT. You just mentioned about that China puts a lot of emphasis on automation and robotics. I'm a researcher on surface industry and was a former professor at the Chinese School of Hong Kong. In your view, how do you think the automation and robotics developments in China will have impact upon the human resources challenges of the firms, private firms, and also from the point of view of the Chinese government in the future? Thank you.
Right. So clearly, we're moving towards automation has a big impact on jobs and places a big challenge on the companies. And I think China is relatively well positioned to deal with these challenges. I say relatively because these are huge tasks, not clear any country can handle it. But if you compare US and China, if you think about gradually, let's say you own a giant factory and you employ 10,000 people, if you look at the tasks that they do and the ability of AI and robotics and automation to do those jobs, they will go from 5, 10, 20% all the way to 90, 95% in the next 15 years or so. And as this happens, I think China is advantaged to deal with that despite the challenges of displacement, job displacement, and change of future of work in the following ways. First, I think the government feels a paternal responsibility to take care of such shifts, tidal waves, just as China has done in the previous industrial revolution, that the government basically accelerated technology change, adopted, embraced technology, and dealt with the consequences of changing labor mix. So I think the same can and will happen. Secondly, I think in the US, the labor union will, I think, put a very difficult challenge for the companies to do that. And I think the CEOs are being kind of held responsible since the US government doesn't quite feel the same paternal responsibility. They feel like this is invisible hand market economy. So if you guys want to upgrade technology, well, you deal with the layoffs and then new jobs will emerge and everything should work out. But I would worry in the case of US, if they took such an approach, the invisible hand might not be fast and expedient enough to deal with the pace of change here. So I think in China, we're going to see more workforce shifts, and the government's readiness and willingness to participate is likely to be an accelerator of that in China. But that's just my prediction. We'll have to see. Today, frankly, we haven't seen much displacement yet, maybe a few percent. The big changes will be probably in the 3 to 7 year time horizon. We can already see a lot of it happening. And again, not just in factories. In the US, the enterprise software, the robotic process automation is doing the same thing for white-collar workers. And we see things that are universal, like autonomous vehicles will cause 9% of human activity, which is driving, to eventually disappear. So all of this will place huge challenges on all governments. And I think the Chinese government is relatively equipped to deal with it.
All right, we'll have a last question, given time.
Hi, Nicholas Gordon. I'm a journalist with Fortune. No, this is not an on-the-record question. My question is philosophical, and it's about copyright. There have been a couple cases of, I know a U.S. court refused AI-generated patents. Getty Images has refused to accept AI-generated images because they don't know who owns it. But as these programs get used more to make artwork, to make text, are we going to have to revisit our idea of what copyright is? Who owns the work that AI programs generate?
I do think people should debate and figure out a good solution. One could credibly make the case that since none of the content is any human, so any human picture generated is completely synthesized and non-existent, no one owns the copyright. Second argument would be, wait a minute, whoever built the software needs to have some ownership or some royalty or some one-time payment. That seems also reasonably credible. That's a business model question. Currently, there are no laws governing that. And the third option is actually an interesting art that is emerging. Is called prompt engineering, which is how do you come up with the right set of words asked in the right way to deliver this amazing image. So one could also credibly make the case that I want to copyright this set of prompts. And this is all complicated by the fact that these technologies are evolving. So let's say you went with your clever prompt using a great software, generated an amazing image, and I guess how do you copyright the prompt and the image, because the image will change, and also even if you use the same software with the same prompt, tomorrow it might generate a completely different image. So this is a very interesting question. I don't have the answer. Again, because of my relative pessimism on the speed of regulation, it's likely to be solved by business models. That is, will the most brilliant video or image creation company decide that, hey, so let's say we came up, let's say I came up, hypothetically, I'm not, but let's say I came up with an amazing text to or thought to video generation, and all the great videos generated are causing huge interest all over the internet. How do I monetize that? So it's a business model question. I could obviously sell a tool that allows you to type in text and generate your video. But I think if I had that technology, I would probably not use it that way. I would say I want to compete with and beat TikTok, because now all of a sudden you don't have all the people generating lip sync videos, which are repetitive and not necessarily that great. Now you can have AI target specific videos to individuals. And I would monetize my video generation system not by selling it as a copyright, because one could say, hey, copyright, that's a thing of the past. I'm just going to build a whole social network based on the content that I could create. Right? And another example is a company called Stable Diffusion. They've connected this with NFTs. So, when you have NFTs, who needs copyright? Because they can use NFTs for that. So there are a lot of, my guess is the regulators will be too slow to adopt the copyright approach that exists today to this AIGC, and that either a business model approach will end up solving the problem, or there's some next-gen copyright, maybe NFT-based or something, that will emerge. But that's purely my speculation.
Can I chime in with my view? So, so my other job is as a visiting professor at the Central Academy of Fine Art in China, and we talk with the students often about this issue. What is not so much about copyright, but what is art and what is a product? And so to use the example of Stable Diffusion, there are artists and designers who are using it to create amazing art. And it is very different from, say, a teenager just playing around with the same software. They're not able to create the same kind of level of art. The reason is the artist who's creating this art, they visualize what they want. They often use like 60, 100 times different prompts until they get what they want. And they make the specification about the lighting, about the style, very, very specifically. So artists with art background, they generate, using the same software, they generate amazing things that a layperson cannot generate. Now, it's hard, as you said, the prompt, you prompt it again next time, it will be a different thing. So what the artists are selling, they are selling their art, is the end product. So they use that tool just like you use Photoshop or you use camera. They, in fact, a lot of them also use Photoshop after they use Stable Diffusion. And they sell that end product, like the painting, and they copyright it or they monetize on it. Like you said, for the TikTok videos, you can monetize on the end, on the product of these systems. So I don't know about copyright, but at least that, people can still make a living. Doesn't mean that AI will replace artists and designers completely. There are more actually new opportunities.
But there will be artists who probably can't draw very well.
Right,
Yet,
right.
Right?
Well,
but they'll create amazing content.
Andy Warhol couldn't draw, right? And he's considered, so there will be new class of artists, and then, places like the Central Academy of Fine Art will have new classes. We're teaching new classes on AI art. There'll be new majors on AI art and AI media and so on. That's not a copyright issue, but.